The first time Officer Grant Mercer shoved me in front of a school bus full of children, I honestly thought the man had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The second his hand hit my chest, every phone around us came up like it was choreographed. Parents started whispering, kids stopped talking, and nobody noticed the only thing that actually mattered that morning. They were all looking at me, while I was looking past every one of them at an old silver pickup parked across the street. My name is Rachel Bennett, and by the time this happened, I'd spent almost 20 years hunting people who stole children. Funny thing is, none of those parents knew that. To them, I was just another tired woman, wearing a faded blue work shirt from the Family Mart on Oak Ridge Avenue, smelling like cardboard boxes and floor cleaner after another overnight shift. That part was true. I really had worked all night stocking shelves. What they couldn't see was that retirement had never really worked out for me. After 19 years with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation's Missing Children Task Force, I'd stepped away to take care of my mother after her stroke. Bills still had to be paid, so I picked up night shifts at the grocery store. Life became smaller, quieter, and honestly, I thought I was okay with that. But there are some instincts you don't retire from. Once you've watched enough surveillance footage, interviewed enough grieving parents, and spent enough nights staring at empty bedrooms where children should have been sleeping, your brain starts noticing patterns that everyone else walks right past. 3 mornings before everything exploded, I finished my shift, grabbed a coffee that tasted like burned plastic, and started walking toward my truck when I saw the same silver pickup parked across from the elementary school bus stop. Nothing illegal about that. Just a man sitting inside. But he wasn't reading, scrolling on his phone, or drinking coffee. He was watching children. I remember thinking maybe he was waiting for his own kid. Then the bus came. Children climbed aboard, and he drove away without speaking to anyone. Strange, but not enough to call anyone. The next morning, he came back. Same parking spot, same baseball cap, same tinted windows, different coffee cup. This time I slowed down. He wasn't watching the bus. He was studying routines. Which parent walked away first? Which kids stood together? Which ones wandered a few feet from the group? I could almost feel years of old case files waking up in the back of my head. Every predator I'd ever interviewed had one thing in common: patience. They almost never grabbed the first opportunity. They waited until routine made everybody comfortable. I called the county sheriff's office that afternoon, explained exactly what I'd seen, and asked if someone could roll through during school pickup the next day. The dispatcher thanked me politely and said they'd note it. Nobody came. On day 3, I finished stocking canned soup around 5 in the morning, clocked out, rubbed the ache out of my shoulders, and walked across the parking lot already hoping I was wrong. God, I wanted to be wrong. Instead, I spotted the truck before I even reached my car. Same place, same angle. But this morning something had changed. The passenger door wasn't fully shut. The engine was already running, and when the driver leaned forward for just a second, sunlight caught the pale blue latex glove covering his left hand. That single detail made every nerve in my body lock tight. People can explain away binoculars. They can explain away sitting in a parking lot. They can explain away almost anything if they want to. Latex gloves at a school bus stop before sunrise? That was different. I pulled out my phone and called the sheriff's office again. No answer. I tried dispatch. Busy. So I started walking toward the bus stop myself, not because I wanted attention, but because distance matters. Every extra second between a child and a kidnapper matters. I wasn't even halfway there before Officer Grant Mercer climbed out of his cruiser wearing the kind of smile that says he'd already decided who the problem was. "Ma'am," he called loud enough for every parent to hear. "Didn't I tell you yesterday to quit hanging around these kids?" I pointed past him toward the silver pickup. "Forget about me. Check that truck, right now." He didn't even turn around. Instead, he laughed, looked at my work shirt, then wrinkled his nose like I'd dragged garbage into his patrol car. "You smell like the back room of that grocery store. Maybe go home and get some sleep before you start imagining criminals." A few parents chuckled. One mother crossed her arms and said, "Officer, my son's going to miss the bus because of this woman." I tried one more time. "Please, just run the plate." Mercer took one slow step toward me, and that's when I realized he wasn't interested in listening. He was interested in making an example out of somebody. And across the street, inside that silver pickup, the driver never stopped watching the children. "Rachel, that's enough," Mercer snapped as he closed the distance between us. "I've got parents trying to get their kids to school, and I've got you standing here acting like you're in some detective movie." If he'd bothered to really look at me instead of through me, he would have noticed I wasn't looking at him anymore. My eyes were fixed on the driver's side mirror of that pickup. The man inside wasn't nervous. He wasn't reaching for paperwork or wondering why a patrol car had shown up. He was calm, almost too calm, because from where he sat all the attention had shifted exactly where he wanted it, away from him. I'd seen that kind of confidence before, the confidence of someone who had rehearsed every move in his head 100 times. "Officer," I said as evenly as I could. "He's changing his breathing. He's getting ready to move." Mercer rolled his eyes. "Now you're reading breathing patterns?" The crowd laughed again, and somehow that bothered me more than his insults. Crowds have a funny way of becoming their own person. One loud opinion spreads, then another, and before long, everybody wants to belong to the same version of the story. To them, I was just a weird grocery store employee causing a scene before school. The truth wasn't entertaining enough. A tall father wearing a roofing company jacket shook his head. "Some people just need attention." A woman standing beside him muttered, "She scared my little boy yesterday too." I wanted to tell them I'd spent years sitting in living rooms where parents would have given everything they owned for one more chance to be scared by a false alarm. Instead, I took one step toward the street. Mercer grabbed my arm immediately. "You're done. Run the plate." "No." "Call it in." "No." "Just look at him." I said no. There wasn't any anger in my voice anymore, only urgency, because every second we argued was another second that truck remained exactly where it wanted to be. Then something happened that made the hairs stand up on the back of my neck. A little girl with a pink backpack dropped her stuffed rabbit. It bounced into the gutter, only a few yards closer to the street, and she instinctively stepped away from the group to pick it up. The driver leaned forward, barely an inch. Nobody else noticed. I did. "Get that child back," I yelled. The girl's mother spun around, startled, but Mercer heard only the volume, not the warning. He grabbed the front of my work shirt with one fist and jerked me backward so hard my feet nearly came off the pavement. "That's it," he barked. "You've caused enough trouble." I stumbled, caught myself, and tried to point past him again. "He's moving." Mercer shoved me toward the hood of his cruiser. The metal slammed against my ribs hard enough to steal my breath. Somewhere behind me a child started crying. Another asked his father, "Is she going to jail?" The father answered quietly, "Looks like it." Funny how quickly children learn who they're supposed to trust. Mercer forced one arm behind my back. "Resisting won't help." "I'm not resisting." "Stop talking. He's going after the kids. You're done talking." The first cuff clicked around my wrist. It wasn't the pain that hit me. It was the helplessness. For almost 2 decades, I'd been the one arriving after someone made the wrong decision, after somebody ignored their instincts, after dispatch treated a worried neighbor like they were wasting everyone's time. I used to wonder how those mistakes happened. Standing there with my face against warm police paint, I finally understood. Pride, assumptions, the need to be right instead of curious. Mercer wasn't evil. He'd simply convinced himself he'd already solved the problem before collecting the evidence. Across the street, the pickup eased forward less than a foot, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. I closed my eyes for half a second and thought about a boy named Ethan from years earlier, 8 years old, taken outside a bowling alley while his father paid the bill. We found him alive 4 days later because a cashier had reported the man sitting in the parking lot 3 afternoons in a row. She trusted her instincts. Ever since then, I promised myself I'd never stay quiet just because someone with more authority told me to. "Rachel." Mercer leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "You're making a fool of yourself." I answered just as quietly, "No. You're making a mistake you won't forget." Before he could finish locking the second cuff, tires squealed behind us. Every head turned toward the intersection. A black county SUV rolled in faster than anything else had that morning, stopping crooked across both lanes. The driver's door flew open before the engine even shut off. Sheriff Daniel Hayes climbed out wearing jeans under his duty jacket, like he'd been called away from breakfast. He looked irritated until his eyes landed on me. Then his entire expression changed. "Mercer," he shouted. "What exactly are you doing?" Mercer straightened immediately. "Sheriff, this woman's been interfering with the bus stop for 3 days. Get her off that hood." "Sir?" "She." Now, there are moments when authority doesn't need volume. Hayes didn't yell again. He didn't have to. Mercer hesitated only long enough to realize everyone was watching before unlocking the cuff. My shoulder ached as I stood up, but I ignored it. Hayes stepped closer, looked me over once, then gave a small nod that carried nearly 15 years of shared history. "Rachel." "Morning." "Dan, you called?" 3 times. His jaw tightened. I never saw the reports. That told me everything. Somewhere between dispatch and patrol, my warnings had been filed under nuisance instead of credible concern. Hayes looked at Mercer. "Do you know who this is?" Mercer glanced at my grocery shirt and shook his head. "Store employee." Hayes actually let out one short laugh, though there wasn't any humor in it. "Former Special Agent Rachel Bennett. Missing Children Task Force. 27 major recoveries. Instructor at the National Crimes Against Children Conference. She trained half the investigators in this county, including me." Silence swallowed the entire bus stop. Even the children stopped whispering. The mother, who'd complained about her daughter being late, lowered her phone slowly, embarrassment washing across her face. Mercer blinked twice. "Sir?" "She never said." I cut him off. "We don't have time." I pointed toward the pickup. Silver F-150. Drivers wearing one glove. Passenger's door cracked. Engine running. Watching routines for 3 straight mornings. He's selecting, not waiting. If he leaves now, we'll lose him. Hayes didn't ask another question. That was one of the reasons I'd always respected him. Experience teaches you when to stop talking and start moving. He pressed his shoulder mic. "Dispatch." Silent response. No lights, no sirens. Units converge east side of Maple Crossing. Box in a silver F-150. "Do not spook the suspect." The pickup moved. Just an inch at first, then another. The driver had realized the conversation wasn't going his way anymore. Hayes saw it too. "Move!" he yelled. 3 unmarked cruisers that had been approaching from different directions accelerated at once. The pickup's engine roared to life. Tires chirped, and it shot toward Miller Road. Mercer stared at me, then at the truck disappearing around the corner. The color drained from his face. He finally understood that while he'd been busy arresting the wrong person, the real suspect had almost driven away in plain sight. None of us spoke as sirens echoed in the distance, because every one of us knew the next few minutes were going to decide whether this morning became another close call, or another missing child whose picture would hang on a wall for years. For 7 of the longest minutes I'd experienced since leaving the bureau, nobody at that bus stop said much of anything. Parents who'd been yelling a few moments earlier stood shoulder to shoulder in complete silence. Children held tighter to backpacks, and Officer Mercer never took his eyes off the road where the pickup had disappeared. Then the radio on Sheriff Hayes' shoulder cracked to life. "Suspect in custody. Repeat, suspect in custody. Vehicle secured." Hayes closed his eyes for a second before asking the question we were all thinking. "What'd you find?" There was a pause. Then the dispatcher answered with a voice that had lost every bit of routine professionalism. "Duct tape, zip ties, candy, children's clothing, handwritten notes with 4 student names, bus schedules, and parents' work hours." Nobody breathed. The mother who had complained the loudest that morning looked down at her daughter, wrapped both arms around her, and started crying so hard she could barely stand. A few minutes later, another transmission came through. The driver's fingerprints had already been run through federal databases. He was a registered violent sex offender who had crossed state lines using multiple aliases and had been connected to an unsolved child abduction the year before. Investigators had never found that little boy. Hearing those words felt less like victory than relief mixed with heartbreak, because every investigator knows the cases you solve never erase the ones that still keep you awake. The ambulance crew insisted on checking the bruises forming across my ribs where Mercier had shoved me against his cruiser. But honestly, I barely noticed them. I kept watching the children climb safely onto their bus one by one, laughing again within minutes the way kids somehow always do. That sound was worth more than any medal I'd ever received. Officer Mercer finally walked over, his face pale, shoulders slumped, looking nothing like the confident man who had grabbed my shirt earlier that morning. He swallowed hard before speaking. "Ms. Bennett? Rachel? I judged you before I knew anything about you." I let him finish. "I thought I was protecting those kids." "I know," I answered quietly. "That's what makes this harder. Good intentions don't fix bad decisions." He nodded, unable to argue. Sheriff Hayes stepped beside us carrying Mercer's badge in one hand. Department policy moved quickly whenever public trust was involved, especially with dozens of witnesses and cell phone videos already spreading across social media. Mercer removed his duty belt himself. Nobody applauded. Nobody celebrated. Watching someone's career unravel isn't nearly as satisfying in real life as people imagine. It's mostly just sad, because almost every disaster starts with somebody believing they're too certain to be raw. Before leaving, Mercer looked at me one last time. "If you'd stayed quiet, I finished the sentence for him. One family might have spent the rest of their lives wondering where their child went. He lowered his head and walked away. A little later, after detectives had finished interviewing everyone, Sheriff Hayes handed me a cup of coffee from the convenience store across the road. It tasted terrible, and somehow it was exactly what the morning needed. He smiled and shook his head. You know, this county could use someone like you, I laughed. Dan, I already have one full-time job taking care of my mother. Then don't come back full-time. Be a consultant. Train the younger deputies. Help with the cases that matter. Flexible schedule. Full benefits. We need experience more than we need another uniform. I looked across the street where the school bus was pulling away, sunlight reflecting off its windows, carrying every one of those children safely toward an ordinary school day they would probably forget by lunchtime. That's when I realized something had changed in me too. I had spent months convincing myself retirement meant walking away from the work completely. But maybe purpose doesn't disappear just because your title does. Maybe sometimes it simply waits until someone needs you again. I smiled at Hayes. Let's talk after I get Mom to her doctor's appointment tomorrow. He grinned. I'll take that as a yes. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how close we'd come, not because the suspect was brilliant, but because everyone had been looking at the wrong person. They saw a tired grocery store worker instead of an investigator. They noticed an old work shirt instead of years of experience. They listened to the loudest voice instead of the one carrying the warning. That's a mistake any community can make if people stop asking questions and start making assumptions. Even now, whenever someone asks whether this story really happened the way I tell it, I always answer the same way. The details change over time. Names fade, roads get repaved, stores close, officers retire. But the lesson never changes. Respect isn't something a badge automatically earns. And wisdom doesn't always arrive wearing one either. Sometimes the person everyone dismisses is the only one paying attention when it matters most. So now I'd really like to hear what you think. Was Officer Mercer simply a good cop who made one terrible mistake under pressure? Or should someone in his position have known better before putting his hands on an innocent person? Let me know in the comments because conversations like these matter more than people realize. And if this story reminded you that listening can sometimes save a life, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who believes first impressions are always right. You never know whose quiet voice might be the one warning everyone else about the danger they cannot yet see.